It sounds like the monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda.
A wave of heartbreak has swept through the royal family after Prince William reportedly collapsed upon hearing his father's final request, a message delivered by none other than Princess Anne. The shocking revelation has left the monarchy and the public in disbelief, sparking emotional reactions across the nation. But what could King Charles have said in his final wish that struck William so deeply? Today, we uncover the touching yet devastating story behind the king's final request and the emotional moment that brought Prince William to his knees. William's hidden heartbreak. In a charged, airless moment, Prince William, the boy born into cameras, expectations, and the shadow of a crown, felt something inside him fracture. It was not the dramatic kind of breakdown that movies love to paint. There were no desperate sobs or collapsing knees, no trembling speeches. Instead, what unfolded was far quieter, far deeper. The slow unraveling of a man who had spent his entire life rehearsing for certainty, suddenly thrown into the chaos of the unknown. His breathing grew uneven, the weight of invisible centuries pressed against his chest, as if every monarch before him had silently gathered to witness his reaction. His hands, steady as oak in public, now clenched the edge of the polished table until his knuckles blanched to bone. The muscles in his jaw tensed, his gaze fixed somewhere past the reality before him. His father's words, those calm, deliberate syllables, echoed in his skull like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't grief alone that stung his eyes. It was realization. It was the shift in destiny so profound that even the air seemed to hum differently. For all his years of training, William had never prepared for this version of the story. From childhood, he had been groomed to carry forward a legacy wrapped in polished ritual and rigid decorum. Every nod, every handshake, every public smile, each had been an act in a grand play of monarchy. He had studied the lines, memorized the choreography, and braced himself for the eventual passing of the torch. Father to son, king to heir, duty to duty. But now, with a few carefully chosen words, King Charles had changed the script entirely. The announcement was not a mere statement. It was an earthquake. Charles had spoken with the calmness of conviction, but its impact tore through William like thunder. The crown center, the symbolic heart of the monarchy, had been broadened, not to one man, but to a partnership. Catherine was no longer just the queen consort in waiting. She had been elevated, placed side by side with him as the living symbol of a modern monarchy, one defined not by hierarchy but by shared strength. For a fleeting moment, William felt the floor tilt beneath him, not from jealousy or pride, but from awe, from the terrifying humility that comes when the world reminds you that legacy cannot be owned. It must be earned and shared. All his life, he had believed leadership to be a solitary calling. Kings stood alone in portraits. History books rarely spoke of the quiet strength of those beside them. Yet now, as his father's voice faded into silence, he saw clearly what had been invisible all along. Catherine's steady presence had always been his compass. Her calmness in public storms, her empathy in private shadows, her quiet insistence on normalcy amid royal madness. All of it had been preparation for this very moment. The future, he realized, was no longer about thrones and bloodlines. It was about balance, about rewriting the story of power so that compassion and courage could coexist. And that truth terrified him, because for the first time, he wasn't stepping into a role he had rehearsed. He was walking into one that no monarch before him had fully lived. His thoughts spiraled. What if he wasn't enough? What if the world that adored his mother and scrutinized his father could not accept this new order? What if history remembered him as the uncertain king who doubted his own purpose? Then, amid the storm of his thoughts, came a quiet touch. Catherine's hand rested gently on his back. No words, no consoling whispers, just the warmth of shared understanding. That single gesture steadied him more than any speech could. Her calm, composed presence didn't diminish his turmoil. It transformed it. It reminded him that strength was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward, despite it. Her eyes met his. A message passed without sound. "You're not alone." And in that simple exchange, the silence around them deepened into something sacred. The cameras might never catch it, but this was the true coronation. The moment when the man behind the crown learned that vulnerability was not weakness, it was humanity, and humanity was what made leadership real. For centuries, the monarchy had stood as a symbol of endurance, but here, in this quiet confrontation between destiny and doubt, a new kind of strength was being born. Not the strength of tradition's weight, but of transformation's fire. William inhaled slowly, straightened his back, and loosened his grip on the table. The storm within him didn't fade. It changed shape. It became purpose. Catherine's hand lingered, her poise unbroken. In her calm, he saw reflection. Not of what he was expected to be, but of what he could become. Together, they represented something fragile yet powerful. The idea that leadership in the modern age must blend grace with grit, authority with empathy, sovereignty with service. The weight on his shoulders would never disappear, but it no longer felt like a burden to bear alone. History would call this a moment of transition, but for William, it was something deeper. The quiet revolution of a man learning to lead not above others, but with them. What pressures could break a prince? Not loss, not duty, but the confrontation between destiny and identity. Yet in that breaking, something finer had been forged. Legacies had not only been rewritten that day, they had been reborn. So, why was William so heartbroken? How did it all begin? Where did the announcement take place? Let's delve into the details of the gathering that vibrated the roots of the monarchy. The silent gathering that shook the throne. Imagine the ancient halls of Windsor Castle, those timeless corridors of stone, where every echo carries the weight of 1,000 secrets. Sunlight slipped through stained glass windows, painting the marble floor in colors once meant for coronations and royal banquets. But this was no day of celebration. No carriages rattled through the gates, no bands played. Beyond the castle walls, the world went on unaware, but within these walls, destiny waited to be rewritten. The royal family had gathered in the grand drawing room. That familiar space of portraits and chandeliers now turned into a chamber of reckoning. Each face bore the quiet dread of those who had seen too much, yet understood too little. A heavy silence cloaked the air, not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes before revelation. The scent of old wood and polished silver hung around them as they waited. The clock ticked faintly on the mantel, each second louder than the last. They had been summoned, but no one truly knew why. Not entirely. They only knew it had to do with him, King Charles III, and what he had left behind. Then, with the confidence of someone who carried both burden and authority, Princess Anne entered. Her stride was firm, her expression unreadable. She wasn't draped in jewels or ceremony. Instead, she wore the look of one accustomed to duty, to bearing truths others couldn't. In her hand was a sealed envelope, the king's final message, written in his own trembling script before the end. Every eye followed her. Even those who had never feared her presence now felt a shiver of respect and unease. Why her? Why not William, the heir apparent, or one of the royal advisors trained to handle such delicate affairs? Why not the archbishop, whose voice had blessed generations of monarchs? The answer, though unspoken, seemed to flicker across the faces in the room. Because Charles trusted her, perhaps more than anyone else. Trust built not from flattery or position, but from scars shared in silence. Anne paused at the center of the room, beside the grand fireplace where so many royal declarations had been made. She ran her thumb across the crimson wax seal embossed with the royal crest. The moment stretched like a held breath, and then, crack, the seal broke. What followed felt almost sacred. She unfolded the parchment, its edges trembling slightly in her hands. The rustle of paper sounded louder than the wind outside. "These," she began softly, "are the final words of His Majesty, King Charles III." No one dared move. William's jaw tightened. Camilla's gloved hands clasped together, and Catherine, ever composed, ever graceful, sat still, her expression calm, though her eyes held a quiet storm. Anne read on, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. The king's words spoke not of ceremony, nor of the crown's endless weight, but of redemption, of legacy, of the need to restore the soul of the monarchy to something purer, something the people could once again believe in. Then came the turn no one expected. His message named not his son, nor any of the old order, but Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge. The parchment trembled slightly in Anne's hand as she read aloud the line that changed the room. "To the future of this house, I entrust not only my memory, but the moral compass of our name, to the one whose grace carries the light of both humility and strength. Catherine, may you guide what I could not redeem." The silence that followed was deafening. Eyes turned to Catherine, who seemed momentarily frozen in time. Confusion flickered across William's face, replaced quickly by something else. Pride? Uncertainty? No one could tell. Anne folded the letter carefully, her gaze resting on Catherine. The room felt different now, the air itself heavier with meaning. What had Charles seen in her? Was it her quiet endurance? The way she balanced modernity with tradition? Or had he foreseen storms ahead that only her steady presence could calm? No one dared speak first. The family, so used to control and decorum, now stood on the edge of something unpredictable. That letter had done more than share a dying king's wishes. It had drawn a line between what had been and what was about to begin. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds gathering above Windsor like silent witnesses. Within, history shifted its gaze. The monarchy's story, once a tale of birthright and inheritance, was now one of character and choice. Catherine, still seated, finally looked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the room. "Then let his words not be forgotten." And with that, the old order began to tremble. The farewell had become a manifesto, and the letter, once just ink on parchment, had ignited something far greater than grief. It had sparked the first quiet revolution within the House of Windsor, one not of rebellion, but of rebirth. In those hallowed halls where kings were made and remembered, the past met the future, and for the first time in centuries, it bowed. Why was Princess Anne selected to make the announcement? How did she feel delivering the message? Let's dive into the details of the conveyor of the message that caught everyone unawares. The messenger's secret burden. Princess Anne was never a random choice. She was the unbreakable thread holding the royal fabric together, the quiet force that endured where others faltered. For decades, she had stood like a stone fortress behind her brother, Charles, through years that saw the monarchy shaken, bruised, and nearly undone. Scandals came like waves, some whispered, some roaring, but Anne never wavered. She didn't seek applause, nor did she crumble under scrutiny. She was the constant, dutiful, disciplined, and utterly immune to the temptations that often consumed those born into privilege. While others chased cameras, Anne chased purpose. Where some saw royalty as a performance, she treated it as a calling. She had no appetite for glamour or gossip, no need to prove her worth through charm or theatrics. Her life had been a masterclass in quiet strength, a demonstration that true influence doesn't need noise. Every ribbon she cut, every hand she shook, every village she visited spoke of a woman who had turned service into second nature. So when King Charles, frail and reflective in his final days, decided that only one person would read his last message to the nation, there was no debate. It had to be Anne. In her, he saw the embodiment of steadfastness, the last guardian of a fading order. He trusted her not because she was his sister, but because she was the only one who had never betrayed the institution, the only one who had stood firm when loyalty had become unfashionable. The air inside the grand hall was thick with anticipation as Anne unfolded the parchment, the sound of the crisp paper echoing faintly against the gilded walls. Eyes followed her every move, the courtiers, the family, the press, each waiting to hear the king's final words. Yet beneath the surface, calm, tension rippled like an undercurrent. Everyone expected a formal farewell, perhaps a message of unity, or a final blessing upon the heir apparent. What no one expected was a revelation. As Anne began to read, her voice carried the same measured grace that had defined her for decades, steady, low, and commanding in its simplicity. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Charles's words, inked in his familiar slanted hand, began conventionally enough: gratitude, legacy, reflection. But then the tone shifted. The king spoke of the future, of the monarchy's survival in a changing world. And that was when the tremor began. The subtle, growing realization that this letter was not a mere goodbye. It was a challenge. Charles's vision, laid bare in ink, broke centuries of silent protocol. He bypassed the expected nod to his son, Prince William, whose destiny had long been etched in public imagination. Instead, he turned his gaze to Catherine, the woman once called common, the Duchess who had learned to stand tall amid the unrelenting storm of scrutiny. He called her the bridge between the old and the new. He described her resilience as the very quality that could preserve the soul of the monarchy in an age of doubt. She was, in his words, the steady flame that can guide the crown through the tempests of modernity. Not an accessory, not a consort, but a pillar. Whispers spread like sparks through dry grass. Some gasped, others stared, unmoving. Catherine's eyes, serene yet uncertain, flickered toward William, whose face revealed nothing. In that instant, the hall became a stage of suppressed emotions, admiration tangled with disbelief, loyalty battling pride. How could a woman born outside the royal bloodline be named the monarchy's true north? It was as if Charles had shattered the invisible glass ceiling that centuries of tradition had built. Anne, reading on, never faltered. Her delivery was calm, but each word landed like a quiet explosion. Her voice didn't tremble. It carved through the silence with precision, transforming the letter from mere words into history being rewritten in real time. By the time she reached the final line, the room was changed. No applause followed, only a stillness so deep it felt sacred. The courtiers exchanged glances, some wary, some enlightened. The younger royals shifted in their seats, their thoughts unreadable. Anne folded the parchment with the same care she had used to unfold it. Her face revealed nothing of her personal opinion, only the discipline of a woman who understood that her duty was not to feel, but to fulfill. As Princess Anne stepped away from the podium, the air thickened with questions. Had the king's final words been a gesture of foresight or defiance? His message seemed to shift the monarchy's very essence, suggesting its survival would rest not on lineage, but on integrity and strength. As Anne's footsteps faded, whispers filled the grand hall. Wonder, fear, disbelief, She had delivered not a farewell, but a transformation. King Charles had redefined royalty as service, not privilege. And through Anne's calm resolve, the fragile monarchy found its balance once more. It was no speech, it was a reckoning. But was King Charles alone in his directive? How would his mother, Queen Elizabeth, react to his decision if she were alive? Let's dig into the details of Queen Elizabeth's position. Elizabeth's whisper from the grave. But the drama didn't climax there. Princess Anne had one final move, one that would tilt the entire room's balance. From the inner pocket of her neatly pressed coat, she pulled out something small, delicate, and aged. A note, its edges yellowed with time, its paper soft from years of preservation. The royal seal was faint, but unmistakable. It was written in Queen Elizabeth II's own hand. The room fell silent as Anne unfolded it. The handwriting, though faded, still carried the steady grace of a woman who had ruled through storms of history. Just one line was visible at first glance. "She will be the pillar that holds it all together." Simple words, but they landed like thunder. Every gaze turned toward Catherine. Those who had known the late Queen understood. Elizabeth never spoke lightly. Each word she left behind carried weight, a sense of foresight that seemed to border on the prophetic. This was the monarch who had outlasted wars, scandals, revolutions, and rival empires. Her instincts about people were legendary. She could read loyalty the way sailors read the wind. So when she wrote that line, she must have seen something in Catherine that others missed. She had watched her quietly over the years, through relentless headlines, whispers of rivalry, and the invisible but heavy expectations of royalty. Catherine had been scrutinized, measured, and tested, and through it all, she never faltered. She smiled when the cameras flashed, bowed when tradition demanded, and stood tall when storms gathered. What many mistook for fragility had been strength all along, steel hidden beneath silk. There was no trace of favoritism in Elizabeth's note. It wasn't affection, it was judgment, calm, deliberate, royal. She had assessed Catherine not as a granddaughter-in-law, but as a future cornerstone of the crown. Elizabeth had seen that her composure wasn't practiced, it was natural. Her kindness wasn't performance, it was character. Where others sought power, Catherine sought purpose. She was a unifier, someone who could bridge divides between the old guard and the modern world, between protocol and people. And now, with Charles's health faltering and the monarchy at a crossroads, the Queen's words seemed less like reflection and more like revelation. How had she known? How could she have foreseen that the steadiness she admired in Catherine would one day be the monarchy's anchor? The air in the room thickened with that question. Even those who doubted the institution's future felt a quiet stir within, a recognition that destiny often reveals itself in the calmest of souls. Anne looked up from the note, her expression shifting from resolve to reverence. Her voice, firm but warm, carried through the hall. "Mother wrote this years before her passing," she began, her eyes never leaving Catherine's. She said, Catherine would be the one to hold it all together. And I believe she was right. There was no mistaking the emotion behind Anne's words. She too had watched Catherine over the years, watched her navigate royal life not with loud defiance, but with gentle consistency. Anne had seen her stand quietly beside William, not in his shadow, but as his equal. She had seen how she won the affection of palace staff, the press, and the public, not through grand gestures, but through simple humanity. As Anne spoke, the note transformed from relic to revelation. It wasn't merely an endorsement, it was an inheritance. A coded message from a queen to her successors, foretelling who would carry the torch when others wavered. Catherine sat motionless, her hands clasped, her face composed, But behind her calm eyes, the storm of realization must have been immense, the weight of legacy, suddenly tangible. The late Queen's handwriting, naming her as the pillar. The thought that destiny might have chosen her long before she ever realized it. Anne folded the note again, tucking it gently back into her coat as if returning a sacred scroll to its place. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reflection, awe, and a hint of unease. For the note didn't just crown Catherine with quiet honor, it carried a shadow, a prophecy fulfilled only through trials yet to come. What did Elizabeth truly see in those final years? Strength, yes, but perhaps also suffering, sacrifice, and solitude. The invisible costs of being the pillar that holds a crumbling house upright. And as the family exchanged glances, a realization dawned on them all. This was no mere relic from the past. It was the Queen's final word in an unending story, one still unfolding in their very midst, guided by the same invisible hand that had penned those 7 haunting words. She will be the pillar that holds it all together. A line that now felt less like memory, and more like destiny itself. How could Catherine get so much honor? How did she get into the royal family? Could there be more to this? Let's find out. Catherine's epic transformation. From the quiet lanes of Berkshire to the glittering gates of Buckingham Palace, Catherine's journey reads like a fairy tale. One not wrapped in fantasy but stitched with grit, grace, and a quiet kind of genius. Hers was not a life cushioned by privilege or pedigree. The Middletons built their world the way ordinary people build dreams, patiently, brick by brick. Carol and Michael Middleton taught their children that refinement isn't about riches, and that true class has more to do with character than with crowns. Poise, humility, and perseverance became their household code, values that would one day shine brighter than any royal jewel. At school, Catherine was an intriguing mix of confidence and calm. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the one chasing attention. Yet somehow, she stood out effortlessly, a presence people remembered without quite knowing why. Teachers spoke of her quiet determination. Friends admired her kindness that never felt forced. She led not by command, but by example, the kind of girl who made excellence look easy. Then came St. Andrew's University, the setting of destiny disguised as an ordinary campus. There, amid stacks of textbooks and shared laughter in old lecture halls, Catherine met William not as a prince or a tabloid figure, but as a classmate, a young man trying, like everyone else, to find his way. Their first encounters were unremarkable by romantic standards: study sessions, group meals, casual conversations. Yet beneath that simplicity, something genuine was brewing. A slow, steady connection untouched by the glitz of royalty or the pressure of public life. It was not fireworks, but a steady flame that refused to go out. When the world finally took notice, it was because the story had ripened into something irresistible. The 2011 wedding was nothing short of a global spectacle. Billions tuned in to witness what looked like the perfect fairy tale ending. Catherine walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey not just as a bride, but as a symbol of modern grace. Her gown, delicate and timeless, whispered elegance rather than screamed luxury. Her steps were measured, her gaze steady, her smile the calm heartbeat of the moment. She didn't just marry into royalty, she redefined it. But the real story began after the applause faded. The fairy tale, once wrapped in silk and sparkle, turned into a test of endurance. Life inside the royal walls was a maze of expectations, traditions, and invisible rules. Every gesture, every word, every outfit became a headline. For most, such scrutiny would crush confidence like glass underfoot. But Catherine, ever composed, learned to dance through it. Her grace became her armor, her silence her strategy. She smiled through storms, spoke little but meant much, and slowly transformed from the commoner who married a prince into the woman who steadied a crown. Her causes were not chosen for glamour, but for impact. When she spoke of mental health, she didn't just lend her name, she lent her heart.
William and I are absolutely delighted to be with you here in Birmingham on World Mental Health Day for our Royal Foundation Youth Forum. Mental health is something we both care deeply about.
She visited schools, sat with mothers, and listened to children. Her empathy wasn't performed, it was felt. Through every appearance, she built a reputation not as a royal accessory, but as a compassionate force within the monarchy, one who understood the struggles beyond palace walls. Over time, Catherine's influence became less about what she wore and more about what she stood for. She mastered the art of quiet leadership in an institution that often favors noise and tradition. While others relied on titles, she relied on substance. She didn't seek to upend the monarchy. She chose to refresh it, softly, deliberately, and with purpose. Her smile became a statement of resilience, her restraint a reminder of strength. Today, she stands not merely as a consort beside a future king, but as an architect of a new kind of monarchy, one that feels human again. The fairy tale sheen remains, but beneath it lies the steel of a woman who has balanced duty with dignity. Her story isn't just about love or lineage, it's about the extraordinary power of the ordinary. It's a reminder that you don't need to be born royal to command respect. You only need to live with authenticity, courage, and an unbreakable will. In Catherine's journey, the magic lies not in the crown she wears, but in the calm with which she carries it. She turned scrutiny into strength, pressure into poise, and expectation into evolution. Hers is not a tale of privilege, it's a testament to perseverance. From Berkshire to Buckingham, she didn't just follow a path to power, she paved it. And in doing so, she became not merely part of the monarchy's story, but its most compelling new chapter. What kind of relationship did Catherine share with Queen Elizabeth? And they have anything beyond the ordinary? Let's delve into the details of the special bond between Queen Elizabeth and Kate Middleton. A quiet mentorship. From the very first moment Catherine Middleton's relationship with Prince William became public, Queen Elizabeth II began to take notice. Not in a dramatic or intrusive way, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone who understood the profound weight of royal life. The Queen had seen generations of royals come and go. She knew that marrying into the firm was not a fairy tale, but a lifetime of service, scrutiny, and sacrifice. She observed Kate from afar, letting time test her steadiness and composure. Over the years, a subtle mentorship began to take shape, one that would prepare Kate for a future few could imagine. William once remarked that Kate had 20 years of the Queen's guidance and support. It wasn't an exaggeration. The Queen's influence began long before formal introductions were made. She led not by instruction, but by example, showing through her daily routine what duty, dignity, and devotion truly meant. One of the first lessons Kate learned, even before meeting the Queen, was patience. The Queen valued a steady pace over hasty decisions. When Kate and William met in 2001, their relationship drew public attention almost immediately, but their engagement wouldn't come for nearly a decade. In those years of waiting, Kate faced intense media pressure, yet she handled it with composure. Without knowing it, she was already demonstrating a quality the Queen prized deeply: the ability to endure with quiet strength. When the two women finally met at the Phillips-Kelly wedding in 2008, witnesses described the Queen as warm and welcoming. That brief encounter marked the beginning of a lifelong bond built on mutual respect. When Kate and William's engagement was finally announced in 2010, the Queen began a more personal form of mentorship. She took it upon herself to guide Kate through the unspoken codes of royal life. There were no formal lessons or written rules, only gentle, situational guidance. The Queen showed her how to exit a carriage gracefully, how to receive flowers without fumbling, how to greet foreign dignitaries, when to curtsy, and even how to manage the complex etiquette of a state banquet, from posture to the proper use of each fork. Kate later described the Queen's guidance as kind, gentle, and encouraging, never harsh or demanding. Her Majesty preferred quiet correction over public instruction, letting Kate learn through shared moments rather than lectures. Beyond official duties, the Queen also wanted Kate and William to enjoy a sense of normalcy in their early years of marriage. When the couple moved to Anglesey, Wales, while William served in the Royal Air Force, the Queen approved wholeheartedly. It reminded her of her own early marriage to Prince Philip, a time of relative simplicity before the full responsibilities of the throne arrived. She believed that those ordinary experiences, cooking dinner, shopping for groceries, attending community events, would give Kate grounding and perspective. To the Queen, service began not with titles, but with humility and the understanding of ordinary life. Their relationship grew through countless quiet moments rather than grand occasions. They shared afternoon teas, private car rides, and thoughtful conversations about balancing public duty with private happiness. Kate's gratitude often showed in small, heartfelt gestures. On her first Christmas at Sandringham, she gifted the Queen a jar of homemade chutney, a humble but meaningful act that deeply touched Her Majesty. The Queen appreciated sincerity, and she recognized in Kate a young woman who valued authenticity over appearance. Over time, the Queen's affection and confidence in Kate became evident. She saw in her the qualities that hold a family and a monarchy together: grace under pressure, loyalty, emotional intelligence, and quiet resilience. One of the Queen's private notes, written years earlier, read, "She will be the pillar that holds it all together." Many later interpreted this as her foresight of Kate's emerging leadership within the royal family. Not through authority, but when Queen Elizabeth II passed in 2022, the world honored her lifelong service. But one of her most enduring legacies quietly lives on through Catherine, Princess of Wales. Over years of observation and subtle mentorship, the late Queen shaped Kate into a modern royal, graceful, compassionate, and resilient amid constant scrutiny. Their bond, built on understanding rather than hierarchy, reflected mutual respect and shared devotion to duty. Today, Catherine carries the Queen's values forward: steadiness, humility, and empathy, proving that true monarchy endures not through grandeur, but through grace, character, and heartfelt service. So, do you think King Charles was fulfilling the dying wish of Queen Elizabeth with the instruction? Or could it be mere coincidence? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.